Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which also provide you the much important avenue to practice daily answer writing, in the first topic, we will not only try to analyze the criticism which our country is facing because of our unilateral support to Russia, but also will try to examine several important components of India-EU trade relations. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to understand that how the recent contract which we have signed with International Seabed Authority, how that is going to help in our mineral energy security. Then from your simplified section, we'll take up 5 news. We'll not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026. So, stay tuned. The European Union's ambassador hailed improvements in India-EU relations, but at the same time called that the Russia question is an issue on which the two sides are not yet aligned. Thus, taking into the consideration this important theme of international relations, which forms an important component of GS2 paper, we'll try to shoot 3 birds from a single arrow. The first is to understand what is European Union. The second is to understand our trade relations with European Union. And the third is to understand our relations with Russia and how that has brought us as a country into the center of criticism. So, let's first start by developing understanding, and that is, what is European Union? European Union is basically a strong political and economic bloc of 27 countries, which you guys can see here on the map, which actually kind of was born from the ashes of the World War II. Here, very selectively ignore our former colonizers, and that is United Kingdom. Why? Because Brexit, or the exit of Britain from European Union, has already taken place in the year of 2020. So, it does not form anymore the part of European Union. The European Union, which is a bloc of 27 countries. Thus, from the last lecture, you guys can actually recall the invasion of Poland, which took place on 1st of September 1939 by the Hitler's Germany, thus leading to the onset of World War II, which ultimately culminated in the year of 1945. After which, there was an immediate realization which was felt majorly by the Western European nations, or the original members, who actually realized kind of an immediate need to build back the economy of Europe, which had been devastated because of the impact of World War II, and to also enhance the security of the region. Why? To actually curtail the spread of Iron Curtain or communist ideology, which was expanding under the rule of USSR, specifically after the Warsaw Pact of 1955 was signed, and various Eastern European nations were also included within the ambit of USSR. Thus, it led to the creation of a single market, which we call today something as Eurozone. When I'm saying Eurozone, keep one specific fact in your mind, that is, does all the countries which forms the part of this European Union, they use Euro as their official currency? The answer is no. 7 out of 27 countries do not recognize Euro as their official currency. The countries like, for example, Denmark, Hungary, Poland, or for example, Romania. What is the evolution process of this Eurozone? So the first and foremost, there was a kind of a free market which was created for import and export of 2 important essential commodities for industries, and those were coal and steel, under your Treaty of Paris 1951, which ultimately kind of transformed into a European Economic Community, which was based upon the principle of free trade, which will be conducted now among these Western European nations under the Treaty of Rome 1957. The formal establishment of European Union took place under the Maastricht Treaty of 1992, specifically after the disintegration of USSR, which took place in 1991, in which the last president of USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev, played a very important role, where Mikhail Gorbachev actually opened up the closed socialist economy of USSR itself to trade with various European nations, following his economic policies or reforms which we called as glasnost and perestroika. Over a period of time, with this increasing economic trade which has taken place under this single market, the European Union has actually emerged as one of the strongest economic power in the world currently. Keep this in mind that when we are saying single market, what does it imply? It implies that on the import and export of any products between these European Union countries, there is no imposition of tariff. At the same time, there is a common standard for each and every product produced under European Union is followed. That basically means that if there is a particular product which has been created or produced in Romania, it can also be sold in the market of Germany. The third is that this single market also provides for the freedom of movement to labor, where they can freely move for any trade purpose, job purpose, for work, for students, or even for tourism. The economic importance of this European Union can be attested from the fact that currently it is valued to more than 19 trillion GDP, that forms 14% of the world's GDP. And it consists of more than 450 million plus population. Just keep in this in mind. They have high GDP. It basically means they also have high propensity to consume. At the same time, they have a huge consumer market, and both of these things are very essential features to be attracted by the India's investor. Where is the headquarters of European Union? That is in Brussels, Belgium. So when we have understand that, now let's try to dwell in depth about the trade relations which we share with the European Union. Keep this in mind. European Union is our countries. This block of 27 countries forms our country's largest trading partner, which amounted to a trade of 134 billion euro in goods in the year of 2023 to 24. So when we talk about our total trading basket, almost 17% of that comes from European Union. 10.8% actually comes from USA, and China follows very closely to 10.4% of our total trade basket. At the same time, European Union is our country's second largest destination of exports after USA. So we export almost 17% of our goods and services to USA, and the second largest destination for our export is European Union. The European Union's share in forest investment stood at around 108 billion euro in the fiscal year of 23-24. There are more than 6,000 euro companies like, for example, Volkswagen, Adidas, Nestle, etc., who functions in our country, who have their offices here. At the same time, they sell majority of their products to our Indian consumer market. But when we look this trade from the European Union's lenses, it tells us a kind of a different picture. Because when we talk about the European Union's total trade basket, the largest country is USA with almost 16% share, and the second largest is China with almost 14% share. However, India's share in European Union's total trade is a meager, abysmal 2.2%, and thus we are only their 9th largest trading partner. But this trade is very important for us, not only because of the numbers, but also because of the huge trade surplus which we have both in goods and services with European Union. Just look at the total EU imports from our country and the total EU exports when it came to good. At the same time, even in the services, EU is actually importing more from our country than it is actually exporting to us. So we have a very favorable surplus of balance of trade and balance of payment when it comes to European Union. And after the kind of the global economic overhaul which took place in the context of pandemic and the trade protectionism which has risen after that, which is reflected from example the Make America Great Again policy of Donald Trump, under which he is basically kind of imposing the tariffs on us. Following the similar line, the European Union has actually started eyeing on this trade surplus which India has, because now they want India to actually procure more of their products, and this becomes the crux of the free trade agreement which is now under the discussion between India and European Union. Because look at the numbers. From the fiscal year of 21 to 24, our export to Europe has consistently increased in various critical sectors like, for example, engineering goods, petroleum, electronic goods, etc., as cited by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The European Union is now actually asking India to lower down the tariffs on their items of interest like whiskey, wines, cars which they manufacture. So if those cars will actually become cheaper in our country, the price sensitive market which we have, obviously we are going to purchase more European Union produced cars. At the same time, if we are able to secure this free trade agreement with European Union, it is going to be the largest such FTA which we have with any economic bloc. Such FTA can also actually help us in improving our market access in various labor-intensive sectors like textile, pharmaceuticals, automobiles, various kind of sunrise sectors, etc. In the absence of FTA, the various economic experts actually claim that India is on the losing side. Why? Because it actually ends up providing edge to the products of Vietnam and Bangladesh. Now let's try to understand this. Let's say there is certain Indian product which is valued currently at 100 rupees. When it reaches to European Union's market, it actually attracts 10% tariff. Thus, by the time this Indian produce, let's say for example, a kind of a towel, when it reaches to European Union, it actually becomes 110. But the countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh, owing to their status of least developing nations, they actually do not kind of attract such tariffs on their product, and if a similar quality of product is reaching to European Union from the market of Bangladesh and Vietnam and it is costing, let's say in Indian currency 100 rupees, don't you think that because our towel has become costlier in Europe, more the cost, less the demand, thus the less the supply also. Now there are indigenous companies or factories which are producing these towels, so their kind of the sale is actually getting impacted. That can lead to job layoffs in our country as it is happening in the case of tariff imposition by USA. So thus these tariffs that actually make our Indian products uncompetitive in the European Union's market. Then there is a big allegation which European Union puts on us, and that is India is a closed market, where European Union says that they already have FTA with more than 76 countries, but they are unable to come to a particular treaty with India because India is providing them inequitable access to their market, which basically forms the crux of the prevailing impediments in India-EU relation. The issues are not only limited to the trade sphere itself. There is also kind of proliferation from the other security and strategic dimensions. The first and foremost is the different approaches which we have, India and European Union, when it comes to the geopolitical understanding, which is also actually reflected from a very famous statement by our Honorable External Affairs Minister that European Union's problem is actually the world's problem, but the world's problem is not the European Union's problem. To understand this in the layman term, just imagine European Union as a chachi which we all know about. The chachi which has paramount interest in everyone's personal affair in the neighborhood. But at the same time, very strategically, she never shared any personal detail about her life. Same approach is actually followed by European Union as well. For example, when Russia-Ukraine war took place in the year of 2020, European Union actually expected our country to put a lot of economic sanctions on Russia. However, following the principle of strategic autonomy and at the same time the principles which we have set under the Strategic Friendship Treaty which we signed with Russia back in the year of 1971 in the backdrop of Bangladesh Liberation War, which was actually led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and very recently his daughter Sheikh Hasina actually fled the country of Bangladesh. So following those principles, we followed strategic autonomy, and to ensure our energy security, we have kept on purchasing the oil which is being supplied at lower rates through Vostro accounts by Russia. The European Union put an allegation on us that why India did not put any economic sanction on Russia, and thus it is indirectly kind of funding the war. However, at the same point of time, the question shall arise in your mind is that why European Union did not put such sanction on China when China unilaterally kind of compromised the border agreement and led to the Galwan Valley clash of the year of 2020. The answer lies right in front of you, because China is the second largest trading partner of European Union, consisting of 14% of its trade basket. So this trust deficit which we have in the strategic terms, it has also kind of proliferated in the trade relations as well. So for example, when an Indian product actually reaches to the European market, it actually faces various kind of entry barriers. For example, the various kind of imposition of intellectual property rules which takes place on Indian product, or for example, the various kind of phytosanitary measures which are kind of imposed on our products. You guys can recall that how recently the rice, a very large containment of rice which actually went from our country to European Union, that was not allowed to be sold in the European Union market because they claim that it is basically a genetically modified rice of poor quality. Then there is a very beautiful article which has been written by Shashi Tharoor in the Hindu, where he writes about the issue of Brexit. So United Kingdom, so for example, let's say if we are exporting almost $68 billion of trade to European Union, at the same time $12 billion export is also being done to the United Kingdom's market. So that is also a very important market for us. Now let's say there is a particular company which is exporting seafood, pharmaceutical products, because we almost meet 25% of the requirement of generic medicines of UK, or let's say for example any kind of photovoltaic cells, etc. When we are exporting all of this to European Union and UK, both of them have kind of a similar kind of economy and market needs, but at the same time we actually have to follow two different kind of compliance mechanism, thus kind of leading the increasing cost of our product in UK market as well and in European market as well. That has led to the proliferation of compliances and less supply chain fluidity. Then very recently the USA's Vice President J.D. Vance actually kind of criticized the European Union, where it said that Europe's internal struggle is due to the overemphasis on liberal democracy. We are following the kind of a very lenient refugee policy. It has led to the kind of proliferation of various terrorist organizations which had created major establishments in European Unions, and that is also reflected in the increasing cases of radicalization among the Europe's youth, which is also kind of evident in the various violent clashes which has taken place, for example in Oslo in Norway, or for example in Vienna, Austria. The India alleges that first and foremost, when you claim to be the kind of the harbinger of the democratic rights in the world, thanks to the idea of liberty, equality and fraternity which was propounded through the French Revolution of 1789. You guys can recall the storming of Bastille on 14th of July 1789. The idea is, when you are claiming that, why you are not applying the same formula outside the Europe? Then why you are supporting non-democratic forces like, for example, Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan? Another major issue is now the imposition of carbon border adjustment mechanism, which in the article Shashi Tharoor very specifically writes that how it is nothing but the another form of trade protectionism in the name of environment conservation now. What is this carbon border adjustment mechanism? To understand that, let's imagine that there is a EU manufacturer who creates ship. And to create these ships which are sailing in the region of Atlantic Ocean and Mediterranean Sea, etc., they basically require steel. Now, if they will create steel in European Union, it is obvious that it will generate carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, and that will lead to global warming. And thus, it can kind of violate the Fit for 55 pledge, which has been taken by European Union in the year of 2019. Where European Union set a kind of a target on themselves that they basically did a vrat. And what was their wish? Their wish was, we are going to cut down carbon dioxide emission by 55% by the year of 2030 from the level of 1990. Thus, to meet the idea of Paris Agreement, the target is what? To actually curb down the global warming to 2 degrees Celsius by the year of 2100 C. So, now let's imagine that there is a company in our country that is called as Tata. Now when EU's manufacturer is actually going to create this CO2, it is actually, there will be a lot of, let's say for example, environment related cess, surcharges which will be imposed upon them. So to actually cut down the cost of steel production, what this European Union's manufacturer of power shipping will do, that it will actually kind of divert this more carbon intensive production to a company called as Tata in our country, India, which has comparatively less stringent climate policy than European Union. They will create the steel from that, and this particular company used to import back this carbon dioxide intense steel. But after the implication of this carbon border adjustment mechanism, now it is required that if such manufacturing power shipping company in European Union is kind of importing such carbon intensive steel from any other country, let's say for example India in this case, then they will need to purchase carbon certificate. And under this emission trading scheme, such carbon certificates will be purchased by whom? Purchased by the importer. So basically now let's say for example if Tata was producing steel, now they have to purchase this emission trading certificate, and thus don't you think the production cost of steel will actually become expensive? Thus it is actually going to increase the cost of products for our country, and now that is being done, a kind of a tariff imposition on the name of environment conservation. So the exporters, they actually provide information on the quantity and the emission of their goods and they buy certificate, and this is going to come into the force from the January 1, 2026. Now when we talk about European Union, keep this in mind that 20.33% of our total merchandise exports actually go to European Union, of which 25% or 1/4 is actually going to be affected by the carbon border adjustment mechanism. 25% of our kind of merchandise products will actually become more expensive and thus non-competitive from 1st January 2026. Thus it will hit major industries and labor intensive industries. Keep this in mind: iron, steel, aluminium, cement and fertilizers. Now when we have understood the prevailing issues with India European Union, now let's try to analyze that what is the criticism which with our good relations with Russia has brought to us. So what about India-Russia relation? The strategic friendship treaty established since the year of 1971. From then onwards, keep this in mind that there is a kind of a huge trade which we actually incur with Russia as well. For example, in fiscal year 23-24, the merchandise trade actually accounted for $65 billion, and a very interesting fact here, we occur a trade deficit of $61 billion with Russia, of which 80% of the imports are in the nature of energy products. So we are very heavily import reliant for our energy needs on Russia as well, where we are importing oil, petroleum, fertilizer, etc. And the target is that the bilateral investments in both the countries shall be increased further to $50 billion by the year of 2025, for which purpose we have also tried to establish more connectivity with Eastern Russia, which still remains underdeveloped and has huge potential in trade, by creating a Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor. Two more things where Russia is very important to us. First and foremost, for our defense purchases, where we purchase defense mechanisms, air defense mechanism, which also came very handy during the Operation Sindoor, if you guys can recall, S-400, T-90 tanks, AK-203 rifles. Many of the times in United Nations Security Council, now recall the last lecture, the Russia has actually, being a member of Permanent 5 in UNSC, it has actually used its veto power to aid our country. What are the allegations which are being put on us? Because of this strong strategic relations which we have with Russia by European Union and USA. And what has been our country's response? First and foremost, the European Union has actually labeled our country as laundromat countries. The countries which has kept on engaging in various kind of economic purchases from Russia, for example, how we are importing oil, and keep this in mind that Russia has actually emerged as the largest crude supplier to our country, with its share increasing to 37%, followed by Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE and US. So we have kept on purchasing oil, and thus we have kept on supplying money to Russia. European Union and USA basically alleges that how such supply of money from our country to Russia is actually funding the Russia-Ukraine war, leading to the death of innocents. Our country's claim is that even before the Russia-Ukraine war actually emerged, India was already the 4th largest exporter of various kind of petroleum products. And we are already 85% import reliant on oil for our energy security. Earlier, we were actually buying a huge chunk of that from Iran. But it was actually US who, under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to kind of curtail the nuclear plan of Iran, it actually put a lot of sanctions on Iran. And those economic sanctions actually made the import of oil from Iran expensive for us, and that's why we took the Russia's route. The Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas very recently commented that how Europe itself turned to the Indian fuels after banning the Russian crude. Then there has been a recent criticism which was brought that India participated in the Russia-Belarus ZAPAD exercise. So now you are basically trying to create, let's say for example, an anti-Europe bloc, it seems. But then very clearly our External Affairs Minister pointed out that in the very same exercise, US, Turkey. Now look at this particular map which I showed you, how Turkey is actually one of the candidate countries to actually join European Union in the future. So Turkey was also there, it was also the part. Hungary, which is a member of European Union, also participated, and you are blaming us. Here look at the India's arm imports. Russia's share is 45%, France share, which is a European Union country, is 28%. Nobody is pointing that. United States share is 11% and 7.7% we actually procure from Israel. So these are basically the claims which has been made by India. Now the point is, what can be the way forward for India-EU relations? So to actually kind of finalize the trade deal which we are going to sign with them, the Shashi Tharoor has basically commented that how we shall kind of look at an early harvest accord to kind of pinpoint the major challenges, solve them and come to a conclusion as soon as possible. For this purpose, we have already established with them kind of huge exchange of modern day technology and trade council which we have created. Then various European countries are actually trying to follow now China plus one strategy, where they are trying to diversify their market and reduce their import reliance on China, and thus India under this free trade agreement can actually emerge as a very viable alternative. What we need to do is we need to transform this make in India to make for the world. At the same time, we are already impacted by this tariff imposition which has been done by Trump. So thus, European Union can actually act as a very important alternative market for us. But if we want our product to have a good demand in European Union, it is very important for us to actually create a standard of our products, which we can do by following zero defect and zero effect policy. India and European Union can actually further indulge in collaborations in the field of Industry 4.0 and mineral supply, and to further enhance our trade relations with European Union, it is very important to actually kind of functionalize the India Middle Eastern European corridor, which will lead us to this Piraeus port in Greece. That is actually kind of come very handy, and thus for that purpose India-EU Resilience Forum has been created to also foster dialogues on non-traditional security challenges, for example emphasizing cooperation in critical technologies and the export and import of raw materials. So keep this very interesting discussion in your mind. Keep all of the data when you're writing this answer, and we move forward to the next news, where India has signed a contract with the International Seabed Authority for exclusive right to explore polymetallic sulfides in the Carlsberg Ridge in the Indian Ocean, thus taking a very important step to ensure energy security for the future, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper. So in this context, first and foremost, let's try to understand that how we have achieved some historic first. What is the context? India last week signed a contract with the International Seabed Authority for exclusive rights to explore polymetallic sulfides, where in the Carlsberg Ridge in the Indian Ocean, thus kind of ensuring several historic firsts, in the form of that we became the first country in the world to have two contracts now with the International Seabed Authority for polymetallic sulfides exploration. And thus now we command the largest area which has been allocated in the international seabed for this polymetallic sulfide exploration, which will be conducted by the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, whose headquarters is based in Goa, which will ultimately conduct geophysical and hydrographic surveys from the 1st of January 2026. Keep this in mind, that this International Seabed Authority act as a kind of an autonomous organization which was established in the year of 1982 under the UN Clause Agreement. What is UN Clause? UN Clause basically stands for United Nations Convention on Law of, which basically govern the oceans and the sea. This again was adopted in the year of 1982 and came into the force in the year of 1994, where it basically acts as a kind of a legal framework which governs the global oceans, where it basically determines the right of a particular country to actually govern the area of ocean, the area which falls within the kind of the natural territory of the country till the exclusive economic zone, as well as what shall be done beyond the exclusive economic zone, which extends up to 200 nautical miles. The International Seabed Authority, which works under the framework of UN clause, authorize and control the development of various mineral related operations. So let's say, for example, there is India, and India wants to explore a particular area in the Indian Ocean to do the mineral exploration. Then a public sector unit of India, it will actually apply that, okay, we want to explore this particular area, and we will also submit a kind of a detailed working plan, which will then be reviewed by the legal and the technical committee of this International Seabed Authority, whose headquarters is based in Kingston, Jamaica. So, why? The question which we shall ask ourselves, why the exploration rights of such minerals are so important? First and foremost, what are these minerals? These minerals are actually the natural reserves which act as a kind of a raw material. The raw material which are essential to create various equipments and components and machinery in various industries, for example, energy, infrastructure, construction, machinery, etc. Raw materials like, for example, iron, bauxite, manganese, mica, etc. These are basically the minerals. So if we refer to the data which has been provided to us by the Ministry of Mines 2024 itself, in our country there existed 1,319 mines, of which 545 were metallic, basically iron, silver, gold, etc. and 774 of them were non-metallic, like for example mica, coal. Thus, the huge importance which it has, making it the backbone of the Indian economy, India's mining GDP for the fiscal year of 2024 stood at 82,680 crore, thus contributing 5 to 6% of the GDP. At the same time, keep this in mind, that it employs 11 million people, and thus after agriculture, which employs 46% of the total workforce, the India's mining sector is the second largest employer in the country. What is India's standing when it comes to the mineral reserves which we have in the context of globally? We rank second in the production of crude steel, aluminium as well as coal, third in the production of limestone, and fourth in the production of the various kind of iron ores we have. Also here keep one very important data in mind. 44% of all the mineral reserves are actually produced by one state, and that is Odisha, 17% by Karnataka, and 14% by the state of Maharashtra. So when we have understood the importance of mineral as a raw material, at the same time the kind of the production capacity which we have in our country, one very important question to actually understand the importance of this kind of contract which we have got in the international ocean, it is very important to understand why these minerals are so important. First and foremost, this extraction of critical minerals which is taking place is kind of prerequisite for the growth in Industry 4.0. The Industry 4.0, which works on a kind of a digitalized economy where we are working with Internet of Things. And to actually run this Internet of Things, the manufacturing of semiconductor is actually sine qua non. So for example, these semiconductor chips are on what your laptop, mobile, etc. are functioning, on which you are watching this lecture currently. At the same point of time, it was these very semiconductor chips which was actually used for the landing of Chandrayaan 3 on the moon, specifically on the south pole of the moon, making our country the first country in the world to actually achieve this feat. Then it is actually also very imperative to achieve our national goals. Let's take one as an example. You guys can recall the Panch Amrit target which we have taken in the Glasgow summit. The Panch Amrit target basically states that how by the year of 2030, 50% of our total installed capacity will actually come for renewable energy. Then to actually kind of do this green transition of our economy, to actually produce more renewable energy, the government has launched Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, which also appeared in your prelims 2025. Under which the idea is to actually install photovoltaic solar panels on the rooftop, And to create these photovoltaic solar panels, we basically require the various kind of, let's say for example, lithium, silicon, aluminium, silver, etc. Keep this in mind that it is this silicon which actually converts the sunlight into the form of energy. Thus, don't you think it is actually very important to ensure the energy security of the country and at the same time the defense security as well? Read this very important article, The Essential Minerals for a Robust Defense Ecosystem, where, for example, when we conducted Operation Sindoor, you guys can see a trail in the night sky as India's air defense system actually intercepted aerial objects during a suspected drone attack. Now, to create such drones, on which the modern warfare is actually going to be heavily based upon, what is the requirement? The critical minerals: copper, carbon fiber, aluminium, plastic, lithium ion, as well as silicon. Now, don't you think that because of this increasing and proliferation of various kind of needs, as per the Indian Energy Agency, the demand for such minerals is actually going to be rise further by 30% by the year of 2030. The question which shall come in your mind is that, are India self-sufficient in the production of such critical minerals, metals and rare earth? What if we are dependent on one such adversary nation of ours on the supply of such critical minerals? This is where the exploration rights actually become more important. If we refer to the data which was provided to us by the Ministry of Mines report 2023, on which this year's one question in prelims 2025 actually reflected, it said that 30 essential critical minerals, of which complete import dependency which we have for us, almost 10 minerals for that we are actually completely import dependent. So out of 30 essential critical minerals, there are 10 such minerals of which we are completely import dependent on China. China, which by the year of 2024 has actually emerged as the world's largest mining nation. Keep this in mind. By the year of 2024, they have been able to discover 173 mineral mines, different kind of minerals, of which 13 are actually energy producing and almost 59 of them are metallic. Thus, China has almost invested $19.4 billion in the exploration itself, which is almost 20 to 25 times higher than our country. And thus, there is a complete dominance which China has when it comes to the critical minerals, like for example, how it is processing 87% of the rare earth elements, 58% of the world's lithium refining takes place in China, as well as 68% of the processing of silicon. In comparison to that, India is basically facing several issues in the supply chain, and we have high level of supply chain vulnerability, where when it comes to the production of these critical minerals indigenously, we faces several kind of hurdles. The first and foremost is the inadequate exploration and tapping of reserves which takes place, and for that purpose we'll take up a case study of ilmenite. Ilmenite is basically a kind of a byproduct of titanium dioxide. Keep this in mind that India is 50% import dependent when it comes to titanium. However, from this ilmenite we can actually kind of extract titanium dioxide. We have 11% of the world's reserves of this ilmenite. But even after that, we actually import billions of dollars of titanium from China. The reason for that is inadequate exploration and tapping of reserves which takes place. There are reasons for that. First and foremost is that many of these minerals are actually deep-seated. Thus, there lies high-risk investment in exploration and mining, which ultimately kinds of deter the private sector from investing altogether. To understand that, let's take another case study of the discovery of 5.9 million tons of lithium deposit which took place in Jammu and Kashmir. As you guys can see, the villagers showing you that. However, as you guys can see from the picture, many of these lithium deposits which we have found, first and foremost, these private companies, even if they want to invest, they do not have any such adequate data that how much potential reserves are there in a particular area. So let's say for example, I take up an area of 5 km square and I start exploring here. But after doing exploration, let's say for example, for 2 to 3 years, I actually find that this area only contains 5% of the lithium reserves. Then all the investment which I have done for 2 to 3 years, that completely goes into vain. At the same point of time, many of these lithium deposits are actually formed along with clay. Even the global technology which we have, there is no such tested and kind of proved technology which exists for the extraction, 100% extraction of these lithiums from these clay deposits. So there are technological hurdles which also lies, and that deters the private investment, leading to the kind of the huge trade deficit which we have with China. Just look here how in July 2025 we imported $113 billion from that, while our export was limited to 14.25 billion. Thus our trade deficit is approximately $99 billion in 2024. That is almost 35% of the total trade imbalance which we have. And why this is such a serious issue? Because just look at the creation of critical dependence which China has done. 97% supply of erythromycin in antibiotics, 86% of flat panel displays and 80% of the laptops, or 82% of the solar cell and 75% of the lithium ion batteries. So if we are saying that we are going to install, let's say for example, photovoltaic solar panels under Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, we are 82% reliant for those solar cells on China. Even our renewable energy missions are dependent on China right now. And thus, India depends most on China even for producing our own export. Thus, as per the Global Trade Research Institute, this overwhelming dominance has actually given Beijing a potential leverage against India, turning this supply chain into a tool of pressure in times of political tension, as China did very recently. So you guys can recall from the very recent Indian Express report, where it stated that how the Indian automobile makers are unable to import these critical minerals to create batteries, equipments which are required for automobile. And thus China is forcing them to actually purchase the complete automobile components altogether. Just look here, the country-wise share in the global reserves of rare earth, China has 49%. The country-wide share of estimated global mine production of rare earth in last 5 years, 66%, 2/3, comes from China itself. Thus, in comparison to that, in India, we have limited production capacity, where even if we want to produce these rare earth magnets which are required in automobile, it will take us 3 to 4 years. And this lack of resources, capital investment by private sector, and the lack of skilled manpower which we are kind of driven into being completely import reliant, and thus we are now purchasing complete parts from China. We already have a very price sensitive market. Thus the cost of automobile will shoot up, and that will lead to the negative balance of payment. Now because this manufacturing is not being done in our country using the critical minerals, it will actually bring down the domestic value addition and thus these companies will not even get the incentive under the production linked incentive scheme. So what our government has done? First and foremost, it has launched Kabil initiative to actually secure overseas mineral asset. For example, India and Argentina under this Kabil initiative very recently signed a memorandum of understanding where we are basically now going to explore lithium in the lithium triangle countries. Lithium triangle countries which include Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, ABC. Then the Geological Survey of India and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research is promoting the concept of circular economy to actually reduce down the wastage. The extraction of critical minerals has been included in the production linked incentive scheme. For the exploration purpose, there is 100% FDI now under automatic route. And then under the National Critical Mineral Mission 2024, we have kind of fast-tracked the regulatory approval process. Financial incentives to the private companies is being provided. They can now acquire critical mineral assets abroad as well. We are creating mineral processing parks as well as Center for Excellence on Critical Minerals. Further kind of exemptions were provided under the Mines and Mineral Act of 2023. Keep this in mind for your prelims purpose. How 6 out of 12 atomic minerals can now be explored by the private sector as well. In the prospective stage of exploration itself, we are allowing that you do your drilling and subsurface excavation, find out how much potential reserves are there as soon as possible. Do not incur loss. Third, National Mineral Exploration Trust is now even funding such explorations. Then under single license, now you can explore up to area of 1000 km square. You are not required to, kind of obtain different licenses. As well as the mine owners, they can sell 50% of the annual mineral, including the coal, in the open market. And in this regard, this particular contract which we have got to kind of explore polymetallic sulfide actually becomes important. These polymetallic sulfides, keep this in mind, are important deposits in the ocean floor where they are rich in various other minerals like copper, zinc, lead, gold and silver. And they are located or found near the hydrothermal vents or the hot springs on the ocean floor, specifically near the ridges, the kind of the ocean floor spreading which takes place and the ridges which are formed there. So keep this in mind that what happens, let's say for example, this ocean seafloor or the seabed which we have, that has got various cracks, and in these cracks the cold water actually goes inside. When that kind of meets with the magma, the hot magma within the crust of the earth, that basically expels this cold water and it comes out in the form of hot gushes which is very rich in mineral. And these minerals are essential in high technology applications, renewable energy systems and green technologies. And if it comes to the land resources which we have for these minerals, it is very limited. Thus, what are the steps which we have taken? First and foremost, we have signed contract with the International Seabed Authority in 2016, under which we have already launched Deep Ocean Mission and Samudrayan Mission. So you guys can see here the Deep Ocean Mission which we have launched for the development of other things as well, like for example, Ocean Climate Change Advisory Services, Deep Ocean Survey and Exploration, under which we have this manned submersible vehicle called as MATS, where we will do deep sea mining system, target cobalt, nickel, copper, which we find in these polymetallic nodules, manganese as well. We can also do biodiversity exploration, Ocean Climate Advisory Services, as well as survey of hydrothermal sulfide. This was the India's first manned deep ocean mission, where we sent 3 humans to 6-kilometer ocean depth in a self-propelled submersible vehicle to explore deep sea resources and biodiversity assessment. As well as now we have been exploring the Carlsbad Ridge, which you guys can see here in the Indian Ocean right north to the Shiv crater. This is a mid-ocean ridge system in the Indian Ocean which was basically created because of the sea floor spreading of Indian plate and Somali plate. Keep this in mind. But then there are certain challenges as well which we need to take care of. First and foremost, these are located near the hydrothermal vents where the seabed is very hard and uneven rocky terrain exists. And many of the time, as we were already discussing, these minerals are found at the depth of 2000 to 5000 meter where the oceanic pressure can be very high. So you guys can recall how there was a kind of this submersible vehicle which was taken by the Ocean Gate Titanic, and 5 people were actually killed on the board. Also, we require huge, precise navigation and communication system as well as high capital investment. So thus, taking this into this regard, it is very obvious that public-private partnership in this context becomes very important. Right, a good way forward, we move forward to the next news, where the Petroleum and the Natural Gas Regulatory Board has actually brought a kind of a new initiative, or they are envisaging to do so, to actually kind of provide the liquefied petroleum gas cylinders more easily to the customers. So what is the initiative? The long delays in cooking gas cylinder deliveries may become a thing of the past, as the latest proposal by the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board comes to fruition, where they have released a concept paper proposing an interoperable service delivery framework, where a cooking gas cylinder is now delivered to the consumer from another distributor if the consumer's designated distributor fails to supply the fuel within 24 hours of booking, thus kind of creating a cross-company service mechanism, where let's say for example till now I was purchasing a particular cylinder from an oil marketing company, and that was let's say Indian Oil Corporation or Bharat Petroleum Corporation. Now it doesn't matter. The distributor can get such cylinder from any such public sector unit altogether. The LPG cylinders which are actually being provided at a subsidized cost under the Ujjwala Yojana. The article highlights that how such mechanism already exists in the European Union, thus highlighting a kind of a global best practice where there is an uninterrupted energy supply is actually considered as a protected consumer right. First and foremost, why the distribution of such liquefied petroleum gas cylinders is of such a paramount importance that the government has launched a scheme altogether. To understand that, we refer to the World Air Quality Report 2024, which basically termed our country as the pollution capital of the world, terming ourselves as 8th most polluted country, where 39 out of the 50 most polluted cities actually was in our country. where the PM 2.5 air quality was actually in severe category at more than 3,000 stations across our country. Just look at the headlines. Delhi, the world's most polluted capital again. India has third worst air quality out of 134 countries. Just look at the 2021 level, which was actually recommended by the World Health Organization, where according to which the PM 2.5 level should have been around at 5 per meter cube. However, just look how they were at 89 microgram per meter cube, and that is only almost 18 times higher than the recommended level by the World Health Organization, leading to hazardous consequences such as, for example, causing various kind of pulmonary diseases, respiratory infections, cardiac arrest. So this air pollution was actually responsible for the death of 1.67 million people in the year of 2020. And the consequences are not only limited to the health of a person, but also has economic consequences, as it led to $36.8 billion loss in 2022, which amounted to almost 1.4% of our country's GDP. One of the major reasons for such indoor air pollution was the use of solid fuel by our countrymen. Just look at the data here. How 41% in India still rely on biomass for cooking, thus emitting 340 million tons of carbon dioxide annually. How India actually topped global indoor air pollution and has the highest annual PM 2.5 level, as we can see. This is the January 2024 report. One major reason for that was the use of solid cooking fuel. So thus, for example, using wood, paper, the cow dung, or for example the use of various kind of agricultural residue or coal itself. That led not only to the environment pollution but innumerable health hazard as well. Why people were majorly driven toward this solid cooking fuel is the obvious reason, and that is excessive use which used to take place in the poverty-ridden states, where they were completely unable to actually afford the other kind of alternative resources, such as, for example, liquefied petroleum gas, which is nothing but a byproduct of the oil refineries. Keep this in mind. It has very high calorific component, so it produces very large amount of energy with very small use of fuel, thus actually leading to ease in the cooking. It also has less sulfur emission, that is 20 to 30% less. At the same time, keep this in mind that it actually produces 30% less CO2 in comparison to the burning of petrol and diesel as well. Then through the use of various kind of pipelines, cylinders, etc., it was very easy for the storage and transportation, and the idea was that it will curb the air pollution, which is acting as a silent killer among us. Just look at the death rate of children below the 5 years of age, how that was almost 1 lakh people, or 1 lakh children on the age of 5 years were actually dying because of the issue of air pollution, and thus our government brought the Ujjwala Yojana of 2016, where it is specifically targeted the below poverty households through identification of socio-economic caste since 2011. It said that the first cylinder which will provide, that will be completely free, and at the same time will also provide you 1600 rupees for each LPG connection to ensure your security deposit, pressure regulator, installation charges. After that, we'll provide you a subsidy of 300 rupees per LPG cylinder up to 12 refills every year, thus replacing what? Firewood, coal, cow dung, and thus to reduce the indoor air pollution. As per IRS survey, there was a share of an Indian household using LPG as a primary fuel that was meager 33% in 2011, but that significantly increased to 84% in 2022. The recent data shows that how 17 crore plus LPG consumers has been added in the last 9 years. Additional 75 lakh LPG connection has been targeted for the mission mode between the next 2 years. And the budgetary support of almost 11,925 crore was provided for this LPG subsidy. However, there prevails several issues. The first and foremost is the unaffordability, that is the high price of LPG. Here, we will try to understand the concept of imported inflation. So the price of LPG in our country is actually decided through import parity price. That is, let's say for example, there is Saudi Arabia and there is a company called as Aramco there. Aramco produces the largest amount of LPG and we actually import the largest amount of LPG from the Saudi Arabia. So the prices which prevails in Aramco, which is dictated by Aramco, that is a foreign company, that basically decide the price in our country. Then you include the freight cost, the import duty, etc. And thus by the time it reaches to the normal consumer like you, it actually becomes very expensive. Now imagine this price in the context of geopolitical tensions which are taking place, or the kind of supply chain vulnerabilities, and that will ultimately lead to the issue of imported inflation. Keep this in mind that as per the IRS survey, only 40% of the consumer thus actually came for refilling. One was obviously the high price of the cylinders. They were not able to afford it itself. Even if the government is paying, let's say for example 300 rupees, and I cannot afford it, the rest of the amount. The second is the shortcoming of the distribution channels, and this is a personal experience of mine. So for example, as per the data itself, only 50% of the consumers get these cylinders home delivered to them. For people like us who used to live in the villages, we actually used to go to the distribution center, which used to be around 10 to 15 kilometers away from our houses. So first and foremost, I will incur the transportation cost to actually go till there to get one cylinder. But the cylinders which used to come, many of the time they were actually kind of undercoated by the distributor or suppliers itself. Thus there was a kind of a intermediary corruption which used to take place. So there was not enough adequate number of cylinders, and many of the time we actually used to come back home empty-handed. The point is that there is a huge input cost which is involved in this travel as well, and there is already a cheap and easy available alternative that I just need to go to the tree and just pluck a wood and I start cooking. So why I will actually wait for such expensive alternative cooking fuel, that is LPG. And the same happened in the case study of Jalpaiguri in West Bengal, where highly degraded forest actually remains in the mosaic of tea state. 50% of 200 plus local shops, they use fuel wood for cooking. 40% of the population is below poverty line, where they have daily wages in the tea state to 250 rupees. Monthly wages 6,000. How they can afford the cost of a cylinder which is 1900 even if the government is providing subsidy? And because of the imported inflation, the cost has been consistently increasing in the last few years. Thus, what can be the way forward? First and foremost is to reinstate the subsidy on the LPG refill for low-income household. So we can target the people who actually need it the most, and the subsidy can be increased for them after census 2027. Then we can strengthen the LPG supply chain and enforce timely delivery. Then the biomass which these people have, instead of utilizing them for cooking fuel, why we cannot actually incentivize them by providing them money, and we can use this biomass for SATA, that is sustainable alternative towards alternative kind of transportation, as well as Pranam scheme. Then further alternative fuels like e-cooking can be utilized, and for that, for the promotion of that, we can do social engineering also. Keep this in mind that today's article highlight that how currently there stands 32 crore domestic LPG connections and 100% coverage nationwide. But there exists the issue of service delivery excellence, where the delivery delays actually forms majority of 1.7 million LPG related complaints. All three LPG companies which we have are actually public sector units, and thus they can provide collective guarantee of the service to the consumer by creating a filling the gap approach. So let's say for example, if the Indian Oil Corporation does not have immediate cylinder to supply, they can actually take it from the BPCL. So we can do a kind of a filling the gap approach. Keep these issues in your mind and suggestions, and we move forward to the next news, where we'll quickly try to understand a very interesting term which has appeared in the news today, and that is South-South and Triangular Cooperation. What is the context of the news? Well, now there is only third of the sand left in the hourglass to actually achieve the 2030 agenda for the sustainable development. So the article says that how nowhere it has actually become more evident that in the evolution of the South-South and Triangular Cooperation, which was recognized each year by the United Nations on September 12 as the UN Day for South-South and Triangular Cooperation. So the question which shall arise in your mind is, South-South, you understand, there is a global South which has remained underdeveloped, consists of countries which are still developing, has mass level of poverty, diseases, low life expectancy, etc. So the global South, you know. What is this concept of triangular cooperation? In this triangle, we basically involves either a developed country or a multilateral organization, which support the global South country by doing what? By funding, providing technology or capacity building. And this concept was actually evolved in the 1955 Bandung Conference, which was acted as a first major platform to create African-Asian unity. Then in the year of 1978, the Buenos Aires Plan of Action, called as BAPA, was actually kind of brought into the force that laid the foundation for technical cooperation among the developing nations. In 2019, there was a BAPA plus 40 conference which took place on the principle of solidarity, mutual respect and shared learning, where the countries, they reaffirmed their commitment to the SSTC, that is South and South Triangular Cooperation, for achieving the Sustainable Development Goal by 2030. If any one of you have any doubt what is a Global South, just look at this particular table. How they have 75% of the population, but 75% of the world's wealth is actually held by Global North. The average life expectancy is less than 50 years in Global South. As per the Global Hunger Index of 2023, 20% of this Global South people actually suffers from acute hunger. 10% of them actually consist of world's manufacturing industry, while 90% of them is actually held by the Global North, who actually spends 90% on the spending on the research and development and thus is much more ready for the Industry 5.0. But to support this Global South, India has emerged as the voice of it, where we conduct the Voice of Global South Summit, and in the third particular Voice of Global South Summit 2024, which was chaired by us, we actually kind of focused upon food and energy security crisis, where the article itself highlights that how, following the idea of Vasudev Kutumbakam, that the whole earth is one family, India has launched initiatives like providing generic medicines and vaccines against the pandemic under Vaccine Maitri initiative. And we also included the African Union under our G20 presidentship in 2023, where we have launched initiatives like Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program and Asia-Africa Growth Corridors. Under the India-UN Development Partnership Fund, we have financed 75 demand-driven projects in various 56 developing countries. At the same time, we are not only focusing upon the digital India, but we are also promoting digital public infrastructure elsewhere as well. A classic example of which is that how Namibia recently became the first African country to actually adopt the unified payment interface. Then the article, or particularly kind of move toward the issue of the hunger which prevails in Global South, where we can actually kind of attest to that fact by using several reports. Like, for example, Food and Agriculture Organization, it states that how 673 million people globally were undernourished in the year of 2024. Out of the 55 countries in Africa, 295 million people were living there who faced acute level of hunger, not even having 2 meals a day. This Global South thus are further facing challenges like trade protectionism, tariff wars, internal civil wars, which has led to the high level of unemployment and poverty there. And thus, this food security challenge is further going to exacerbate by the extreme weather events due to the climate change. Thus, the Hindu article of 2025 actually highlights that how there live 31 million people in Nigeria which face acute hunger, that is almost equal to the population of the national capital territory of our country, and that is Delhi. Some of you had wondered how to identify important points in editorial. So look how, in the context of this issue of global hunger prevailing in Global South, the article highlights that how the World Food Program has mobilized $10.9 million for Global South countries and the private sector to actually support such SSTC projects which are aligned with the SDG 2, and that is to curtail the zero hunger. Recently, India, along with the World Food Program initiatives, such as, for example, United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, India has pooled rice fortification and supply chain optimization in various countries like Nepal. Then under UN India Development Fund, we have also kind of provided the same food security and supply to Laos People Democratic Republic. The theme for this year UN Day for South-South Cooperation is New Opportunities and Innovation, which capture the challenges before us. Also, to quote anywhere when it comes to Global South and how India is a voice of it, write this particular conclusion point, that on 25th of August 2025, the India's Department of Food and Public Distribution actually signed a letter of interest with World Food Program to supply fortified rice to crisis-hit populations all across the world. And thus we have traveled a far, quite far, where once at one point of time we were kind of wheat import dependent on USA, and now we are basically acting as a kind of a granaries of the world. Keep that in mind. We move forward to the next news, where we'll try to develop understanding about what is Wassenaar Arrangement. Thus, what is the context of the news? The modern internet is actually built on vast computing backbones that a very small number of companies control. And if you guys are watching in your laptop, you guys can see the Microsoft system which has installed there, the Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, etc. Thus, among that, Microsoft has actually become indispensable even for the functioning of the governments worldwide as well. But when the infrastructure of such private companies like Microsoft is used to deepen the Israel's repression of Palestinians, it actually raised difficult questions. That how the export regimes can govern the services, like for example, how Microsoft can actually govern the misuse of these services that they have never imagined when those rules were actually drafted. What are export control regimes? These are basically international agreements between the supplier country to control the export of sensitive goods and technologies to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Like for example, nuclear codes. So for example, there might be some laptop in our country which might be having that nuclear code. Maybe. What if that information is leaked because of the misuse of the software? This is where the export control regime becomes very important. So Wassenaar Arrangement is such a multilateral export control regime for conventional arms and dual use of goods and technologies, which was established back in the year of 1996 with Vienna as a headquarter and currently contains 42 members, including our country. What are the features of this Wassenaar Arrangement? Remember that the participating states actually commit to control the list and exchange the information. Each government is allowed to retain its discretion on three factors: licensing, implementation, and enforcement. In 2013, the arrangement also included such intrusion software, like for example, hacking of your mobile. Software which are designed to bypass or defeat the security of the surveillance. So what are the shortcomings in this Wassenaar Arrangement? There are several persisting challenges. First and foremost, there are various gray areas. Like for example, the flow of technology and information on cloud services. Why? Because there does not exist any uniform definition of access, use or administration of software to be an item of export. Then each and every country, they actually differ on the interpretation of technology transfer as well. So when the whole world is actually following this software as a service model, the user can actually remotely invoke a functionality instead of installing it locally. Let's say for example, there is a software called as Pegasus attack. You guys might be aware about it. So just because I clicked on a link, suddenly all the sensitive information which I had in this particular mobile or let's say laptop has now been compromised. But this will be considered as the export of service? Now that is not included in the Wassenaar Arrangement. So India, which joined back in the year of 2017, we have also listed several items of exports which shall be controlled, and that is special chemicals, organisms, materials and technology. The case is that India, let's say for example, asked China that there is a several red eco attack has taken place, right? Where let's say for example, there was a red eco attack which took place on the Kundankulam nuclear power plant in Chennai, where they basically tried to compromise the security of a nuclear power plant. Just imagine the level of a threat. So we go to China and we say that, you know what, just share us the information. But then the China can, under the Wassenaar Arrangement, can actually say that they have a different domestic export control legislation which does not allow for sharing of such sensitive information. At this instance, also keep this in mind, India can never ask China itself. Why? Because China is not part of Wassenaar Arrangement. India signed it. Why? Because to actually boost our credentials to enter the nuclear supplier group, which we have not yet been able to. And this was the question which UPSC asked one year. They gave nuclear supplier group, missile control technology regime, and this Wassenaar Arrangement, which all India has signed. My question to you all is whether India is a part of missile control technology regime or not. So there are certain suggestions which has been given by today's article. Just keep an eye on them. I will read very selective few for you. Like for example, how there shall be a list of control technologies, and they shall be explicitly include the infrastructure and services which actually kind of provide for large scale surveillance, discrimination, profiling, real time control, etc. Like for example, regional biometric system or cross border data. So for that we should have exclusive infrastructure. Then The arrangement's voluntary nature is actually weak itself, where we are providing for every country to have their own domestic rules altogether. So all the states shall actually adopt a binding treaty or framework that include mandatory minimum standard for licensing, export denial in atrocity prone jurisdiction, and there shall be a supervision. Then national licensing authorities must share information and align their policy decision. And to this end, the arrangement should actually include a technical interoperability standard, which shall be maintained by, if India is maintaining that, then let's say for example, Russia shall maintain that as well, for exchange of what? The red alerts in real time, when a cloud provider actually offers certain services to even a blacklisted state. So keep these suggestions in your mind. Wassenaar Arrangement is specifically for prelims, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to read about the Nobel Peace Prize and why this has been in the news. Because the winner of the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize is going to be announced on October 10th at Norwegian Nobel Institute in Oslo. The ceremony will award the winner a medal, a diploma, and 11 million Swedish crown, $1.1 million. It might be too much, I have never seen in my life anyway. And that will be held at the Oslo City Hall on December 10th. December 10th is basically the anniversary of Swedish industrialist Alfred Nobel, who basically invented dynamite. Now, why this Nobel Peace Prize is frequently in the news? There is a reason for that, because the US President Donald Trump is actually eyeing on the prize. Last year winner was Nihon Hidankyo, who basically is a kind of an atomic bomb survivor group. This year, the US President, the US basically bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Now the president of that particular country is actually eyeing for it. So that is a paradox for you. Why Donald Trump is claiming that? Donald Trump's supporters says that first and foremost, USA under Donald Trump played a very prominent role to sign Abraham Accord, to restore diplomatic ties between Israel and Arabic countries like UAE and Bahrain. Then under Donald Trump, there was a direct communication channel between US and North Korea was actually opened. And he has been nominated by several Norwegian and Swedish parliamentarians. So let's try to understand in detail about Nobel Peace Prize. Remember, Nobel Prize is given for several other dimensions, including chemistry, physics, medicine, and literature. Nobel Peace Prize is being given every year annually. It was stopped for certain years in between. Since year of 1901, for what? For best work for fraternity between the nation, Abraham Accords, Donald Trump, and as well as for the promotion of the peace. And it is decided by a Norwegian Nobel Committee, which consists of 5 members, and they are appointed by the Parliament of Norway. Keep this in mind, it is the only Nobel Prize which is not presented in the Stockholm, Sweden. A very interesting case here in the year of 1939. When we are talking about nomination of Donald Trump, keep this in mind, that there was actually nomination from members of Swedish Parliament who nominated Adolf Hitler at that point of time. Why? Because they were basically mocking the other nomination of Neville Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of UK at that point of time, and he was following that kind of the policy of appeasement to keep Hitler happy, and thus ultimately served him Poland on the plate. Okay? Also, there are various other organizations which can nominate for this Nobel Peace Prize, keep this in mind, like member of Inter-Parliamentary Union, the member of Permanent Court of Arbitration and International Court of Justice, the members of Institut des Droits International, the professors of history, social science, philosophy, law and theology across the world, as well as previous recipients who also include the board members of the organization. Several notable members which you shall remember, like for human rights advocacy, Malala Yousafzai has got that. For environmental work, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has got that, which releases our 6th assessment report. The humanitarian aid, Mother Teresa has got it. Mother Teresa, who got Nobel Peace Prize in the year of 1979, and thus was included in the list of the exclusive people of our country who has actually won this prestigious prize. The first Asian and Indian being the Rabindranath Tagore, who won it for the year of 1939 for a poetic book which he wrote, and the name of the book is, please write in the comment box. Take it. Also for social justice and civil rights, Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. One very important thing which shall keep in your mind here is that it is not only given to individuals but also to organizations like IPCC as well as United Nations itself, whose specialized agencies has already won it for 12 times. Keep all of these facts in your mind and we move forward to the last news of the day, where we'll try to understand in a very succinct manner what does it mean by the index of industrial production. Why it is in the news? Because the index of industrial production, which is released by the Central Statistical Office under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, it has showed that how the growth in the industrial activity in India actually showed kind of slowed down to 4% in August from a 6-month high, and that was 4.3% in July. And this slowdown in growth has occurred because of the consumer durables and non-durable sector, as well as the slower growth which took place in the manufacturing, capital goods and infrastructure sector. So just look at the year-on-year change which has taken place in the index of industrial production, whose base year has now been changed. Keep this in mind, to the year of 2018 to 19. So how we calculate whether the production or the manufacturing of particular goods has increased or not, we keep the current period production quantity, the base year production quantity, and then we multiply it by 100. This index of industrial production consists 77% to the manufacturing sector, 14% to the mining sector and 8% to the electricity sector. Then there are certain 8 core industries about which the every month articles actually talk about. I have created a kind of a device for you, to all of you, to remember it easily. We'll learn a small story here. The story is that there was a person. The person was a farmer. The farmer wanted to create, let's say for example, fertilizer for the increased productivity of his crop. So he used natural gas, oil as well as coal. And from these 3 things, coal, oil and natural gas, he created fertilizer. So when he created fertilizer, the productivity of the crop increased. He became rich. And thus he first and foremost went to the market and brought certain refinery product. When his kind of materialistic needs were completed, he realized that I should have a house as well. And thus he used steel and cement to further create a house, the house which requires electricity. So remember, a farmer who needs a fertilizer, and you will remember the rest of them. And with this we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, and thank you.